Castlegard Manor is the largest CAV-funded family housing development in Ireland. A unique selling point of this project is its rapid build, modular form of construction. These units are actually steel framed, with 90% of the build taking place in a factory in Ballyjamestuff in County Cavan. The units are completed on a modular basis within the factory, with all internal fit-outs being completed there. This form of construction has facilitated the rapid delivery of this scheme, with all 102 units being handed over and allocated within a 12-month period. With an average unit cost of 218,000, which includes professional fees and land costs, it represents excellent value for money.
Good afternoon, everyone, and you're all very welcome to this afternoon session of the ICSH Finance and Development virtual conference. We would normally just be returning from lunch and settling into the auditorium, but you're all very welcome back to wherever you're joining us from. My name is Karen Murphy, and I'm Director of Policy with the ICSH, and the title of this session is Reaching Housing Delivery Targets. And I think it's a very, very, I suppose, apt session today, given that the department has just published earlier on the construction status report update and the Q1 and Q2 figures for 2020. So we'll get to those in a short while. But I'd very much like to welcome the panelists we have here with you this afternoon. Eddie Taaffe is the lead with the Housing Delivery Office, which is located in the LGMA. Eddie has 26 years experience in the local authority sector from a civil engineering background. So Eddie, you're very welcome, and I think you're going to have a lot to say, very focused on the discussion today. Declan Dunne is also joining us. He's the CEO of Respond Housing. Respond Housing itself is active on over 1,200 units on site at the moment across Ireland. So Declan brings a wealth of experience, both from his private management background and I suppose a very wide public sector management experience as well. So Declan, you're very welcome also. And Orla then is going to join us from the UCD School of Architecture. Orla is an architect and has practiced in Ireland, the UK and France. And she's very well known as a commentator on construction industry and housing sector. And no doubt we'll have much to say about I suppose, the challenges that we face in relation to reaching the housing delivery targets that have been set, and how maybe there may be some opportunities out there as well at the moment. So without further ado, Eddie's going to kick off for us this afternoon. There will be time for questions and answers at the end. So we'll let all the speakers go through their session and then we'll come to the Q&A. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Karen. My name is Eddie Taaffe. I work with the Housing Delivery Coordination Office, which is a new office. It's been established since March, literally only a few weeks before lockdown. And I have a brief presentation, which I will attempt to share with you. Hopefully it will all go well. Try and put that up now. And as I say, it's a chance for me to introduce the work of the office and to give you an overview of what we've done so far, and also what we hope to do in the next couple of years. Can I just check that everybody can you see that? Yeah. You might just confirm, Karen, that
yes, we can see it, Eddie. You might just want to start slideshow so that it goes into the full slide.
Oh, okay.
From beginning up there, yeah. But we can all see that, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So as I say, the overview of the content of the presentation is I give you the main objectives of the HDCO, what our immediate priorities are, what we'll be looking at in 2021. And I suppose I'd like to spend the main part of the presentation on the challenges and best practice approach that we hope to take. The main objectives are, At any one time, there's between 2,000 and 3,000 housing projects ongoing around the country at various stages in the pipeline, be it from feasibility study to final account. And the capturing of all that data is absolutely essential so that we can make accurate projections and accurately predict housing delivery as to how many units and when they are going to be occupied and available. Also, other issues, we need to streamline our interactions with utilities, be they ESB or Irish Water. And because we have 31 local authorities, the establishment and dissemination of best practice throughout the sector is always an issue and always needs to be kept at the forefront of how we do things. And as I say, because you can't deliver housing on your own, we also need to make sure that we engage with all stakeholders as effectively as possible to make sure that we all understand where everybody is coming from and that there's no, I suppose, blockages or overlaps or impediments to delivery. So the immediate priorities for 2020, first off, the office was only established about a month before the COVID lockdown came in March. Our immediate priority was to assess the impact on 2020 delivery of the 7-week suspension in construction site activity. Now that suspension was actually longer because some sites had started to slow down before the full lockdown, and some sites took a period of time to get back to activity afterwards. And there has been a drop in activity on some sites depending on where they were at because of physical distancing requirements. So that is very much the forefront of our mind at the moment. But also COVID has had a knock-on effect into 2021 delivery. So at the moment, we are trying to project exactly what's going to deliver in 2020. We think we have a reasonably good handle on that. There will be an impact on it. And in particular, because a lot of schemes were due to finish up in November or December, that COVID has had a particularly negative effect on those schemes. But what that means is that schemes and projects that were due to deliver in late this year, they will deliver in January or February of the following year. As I mentioned earlier, we need to streamline how we report on all our projects and how we gather the massive amount of data around every single project and how they move through the pipeline and move through the phases. And we also, as a sector, need to input into any new affordable housing scheme and the deliberations that the Minister and his senior officials are engaging at the moment in progressing a new affordable housing scheme. And as I mentioned earlier, the high-level stakeholder group with the Land Development Agency, the Department, the Housing Agency, Irish Water and the CCMA, to make sure that we're all on the same page and that we all understand where each other is coming from. 2021 and onwards, once we've got those immediate kind of top priority items where we want them to be, one of the big issues in continuing to deliver housing is land. It's very, very simple, but a lot of local authority owned land has either been built on or is committed in the pipeline. And what we need to do now is start looking at the next round of acquisition of serviced and suitable land. So that's something we're looking at the moment. And we have a land GIS, which people would be familiar with, hosted by the department, that shows local authority lands. So that needs to be kept up to date. But as I say, we need to identify future lands for the very ambitious programme that is in the programme for government. The other element of it is, we haven't been doing enough of this, to be quite frankly, but we need to look more at urban regeneration projects. The social housing building programme is a very, very extensive programme that involves a huge state investment, and we need to make sure that that investment is targeting more than one objective. And there is an issue with urban dereliction, underutilisation of land in, I would suspect, nearly every town in the country. And we need to target our social housing investment to tackle that issue to a much greater extent than we have been heretofore. So we are piloting, and we will be promoting best practice in that regard. And I think there's an appetite across all sectors, state and public, to do that. And as I mentioned earlier, just best practice on affordable housing schemes. And what I mean by best practice is, when it comes to affordable housing schemes, simple is best. The scheme needs to be simple and understandable. And if you have something that's simple and understandable by all stakeholders, that's how you can guarantee as much delivery as possible. Now, that's all very well, but the challenges, there's no doubt about it, but the local authority sector needs to build more what we call SHIP projects, Social Housing Investment Programme projects. And that's just straightforward, where the local authority owns the land, the local authority designs the houses, gets the planning approval for them and builds them. We need more of that. As I mentioned earlier, we need a simple and affordable housing scheme that can deliver quickly. And what I mean by quickly is, if we do it right, we can deliver affordable housing by next summer. But it depends on how the scheme is formulated and how it works. We need to reduce the overall reliance that local authorities have on turnkeys. It's a significant portion of housing delivery at the moment. And as I say, if we need to ramp up more local authority schemes on local authority lands and reduce the reliance on turnkey. The programme for government has set an ambitious target of 50,000 social houses. We need to put in place a delivery strategy for that in overall context, but that means then that every single local authority has to put in their own delivery strategy, taking the targets they are given and saying where these units are going to come from, how they're going to address the need, and that they're targeted on the need and the geographical spread within their functional areas, and what they need to deliver those houses, be it land, be it services, etc. As I mentioned earlier, we also need to target the investment to reduce dereliction and bring on more brownfield sites. We can't keep going to the well of the greenfield site on the edge of town and, you know, exasperating what is already an issue in some of our towns by leaving hollowed out and depopulated town centres. More longer term issues, I suppose, reduction in HAP and leasing. At the end of the day, all leases have to come to an end, and we need an exit strategy for leasing, and that needs to be put in place sooner rather than later, because while housing is long term, it won't be long coming around that leases will come to an end, and we need to have a strategy there. More one beds. We're not delivering, as a sector, we're not delivering enough one beds. A significant portion of the social housing list is one beds, and we're not, as I say, we're not delivering enough there. And that would tie in as well with delivery in urban and brownfield sites. And as I mentioned earlier, last but not least, the whole area of land. So all very well having land, but it needs to be serviced and it needs to be suitable. Just touching on the data collection, we've put in an interim solution whereby local authorities, the famous tracker for those of you who will be involved in it, the department have a tracking system for housing projects. We have looked at that and we've made a few changes to it, and we will be getting weekly real-time data on all our housing projects. And the local authorities, there's a system in place now where local authorities will do that. There is a lot of kind of toing and froing about projects, and we need to streamline that. So this system that we're putting in place as an interim solution for the next year, 18 months, will make life, I think, a lot easier for everybody involved in housing delivery. Best practice. Procurement is a major element of what we do, and it requires a huge amount of staff resources. We could make that better by moving more towards design and build. And what I mean by that is that currently local authorities under the Part 8 process, or the planning process, is effectively a preliminary design. So that sets out the overall layout of a site or a scheme. And what we need to do then is, instead of designing that, procuring architects, designing it, and then having another separate procurement process for builders, we can streamline that by using design and build, where the builder effectively retains the architect and undertakes the detailed design of the scheme. And that, we think, will shave at least 6 months and possibly 12 months off some scheme delivery. We need to be more compliant with the NPF. As I mentioned earlier, the NPF calls for 40% of new residential units to be within the urban footprint or on brownfield sites. One beds, 47% of the list, and to date it's about 11% of delivery. Now, if you look at the pipeline, that does go up to about 15 or 17%, but it still needs to go up further. project management guidelines. We don't have a single source of project management guidelines for housing delivery. It's all there, but it's in a number of different places, and that needs to be pulled together and put into one source so that anybody who's a practitioner can have one source of project management guidelines that is a how to deliver a project. Affordable housing delivery, again, bringing best practice. There are some very good examples out there, but simple is best. And interaction with Irish Water. Irish Water are absolutely critical to housing delivery, and so making sure that we interact with them and also understand where their programs are and that our programs interlink with their investment strategies is very, very important. So there's two levels to the interaction with Irish Water. There's just strategic interaction on where they are servicing and where we want to build houses. And then there's the operational interaction, which is, now that we have a scheme, how do we make sure that the services are connected in a timely and efficient manner, and that everybody understands what they're supposed to do to make sure there's no delays at the end of a scheme? So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the HDCO. We're only really getting going at the moment. We are a very small office. It's myself and 2 project managers at the moment, and we'll have 2 more project managers specializing in IT and data in November. So it'll be 5 of us trying to coordinate and act as a liaison on all those issues, and trying to coordinate the activities of 31 local authorities and the interaction with the department. So I know there's a lot in that, but thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks very much, Eddie. Appreciate that overview of I suppose the tasks that you're taking under your wing at the moment. No short order. There's a lot of coordination involved there, and even the range of issues that you're across, whether it be liaising with utilities, managing stakeholders, across to best practice on new schemes like affordable housing. So I do think we'll be coming back to you, Eddie, in the Q&A. So take a short breather there. You're not off the hook yet, though. And I'd like to welcome Declan. And I think Declan, following on from what Eddie has introduced there, very much as an active Tier 3 AHB who are currently on site and dealing with, I suppose, COVID and, you know, planning ahead as well. We very much look forward to your input, Declan.
That's great, Karen. Can you hear me okay? You can hear me okay, can you?
Perfect, Declan.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everybody. Like everybody else, we're missing the opportunities for the coffee breaks, meeting each other, and all the business that gets done at that time. But this is the world we're living now. But just to compliment the ICSH, this has run very smoothly, and really has been some excellent content. So what I was asked to do today really was to talk about delivery from the experience of an AHB, the practical issues that we're facing as we go about doing our work. So I've got a presentation, I think Craig's going to put it up there now, just to give you some imagery of some of the things we're doing while I talk through it. Thank you very much. So if we go on there and look at the next slide. So what are we talking about really? It's about reminding ourselves, as the ICSH does many times, that Rebuilding Ireland expects that AHBs will deliver at least a third of the overall social housing delivery targets in the country. And the good news is that that has happened and been exceeded in the last year. And it's looking very good for the future. A number of people today have said that the housing crisis has not gone away. And when I wrote that, I asked myself, am I being overly negative when already people have other things to be worrying about? But interestingly, quite a few people have mentioned that today. And we do have to think about that impact of people who are waiting for so long on housing lists for homes, when we're asking people to stay at home and stay safe. To have a home where you can do that and your family can do it is obviously more important than ever before. And as an organisation that's run 6 homeless services ourselves, we're particularly aware of the need to move people through and out of homelessness. And our own experience is, at the moment, it's gone up to 7 months on average. We had it just below 6 months before COVID, but we're still moving people into their own homes out of homelessness within that period, which isn't too bad. But we have to have the homes for all of the people that were mentioned earlier who are depending on us. And that's, for that reason, it is very important that we need the mix of units that others have spoken about. So Eddie, I know from a number of things, but also from the Minister's Housing Delivery Group, where I represent the Alliance members there, and along with Pat and Dunne from the ICSH. And there's a real focus on actually moving things on in a very practical way. What can we do this week to make more people be able to be allocated homes this year? So we go on then, I just want to show you some imagery there for a second. So this is just to bring a little bit of colour in it. What this is an image of 2 blocks that we delivered this year in Northwood, which is opposite IKEA off the M50. And these are brand new apartments, very high energy rating, play areas and other facilities present. All of the schools and creches and shopping areas are immediately nearby. So that would have been last year to have our average project in Respond would have been, for some reason, 55 homes would be the average size. And I'm going to talk about that a bit later, about scale and efficiency. At the moment, that no longer represents our average. So at the next junction from this is on the M50 junction, just as going into IKEA. At the next junction up at Finglas in Charlestown, we have halfway through construction, 138 apartments in construction on a single site, which is the largest site that we have in construction at the moment. So if we move on then, just to show you another image from another part of the country, and this is Middleton. So these are 42 homes that have been completed in that area, and it shows you the more traditional format, architect designed, really nice design, great light in it. The way that they've approached the lobbies, letting a lot of light and glass in, when it'd be so much easier to have just put in concrete walls. It's made a big difference to the look and feel of these homes. And I suppose in all of this, we have to think about, how COVID is going to make families and individuals want to have some outside space. So there is a big park area in the centre of this development, and there's also a community building, and all of that's just been completed. So if we go on then to the next one to talk about what kind of delivery. So there has been discussion this morning by a number of people talking about what kind of delivery is needed and not needed. And Eddie made reference earlier to the ways that we acquire or build homes. So I want to talk about that a little bit today, if I may. And before I do that, just to say, what is the approach that Respond is taking? So I'm a newbie in Respond. I'm there 4 years. It's been around 38 years. And its traditional approach has been to employ directly its own professionals. So there are 18 currently, architects, planners, quantity surveyors, etc., employed directly by Respond to oversee its developments. And we're just about to employ 2 more, a deputy head of development and another architect. So what are these people doing? What they're doing is they're overseeing the construction that we're already involved in. So there's 1,288 homes that Respond has in construction today. So we have commenced in the last couple of years just over 1,800 homes, and we have 1,200 at the moment. That's been added to all the time. We're just about to start a scheme of 130 homes, which are up in Marsh Road, up in County Louth. So what the approach that we're taking and what allows us to do this work really is having the resources. So having the finance department, having the legal department in order to support the work that we're involved in. So I understand, that having worked previously as the CEO in Sofia, we didn't have those resources. We're a smaller organisation, a specialist organisation, an extremely good one in providing wraparound services for people with complex needs and dual diagnosis. But in order to operate at this kind of scale and to deal with the risks, and there was reference to AIB about contracting into development risks, and I'll talk about that. We really need to have the resources available to manage that risk. And we're fortunate, you know, that there's over 307 people employed in Respond to all of our services and activities. There are 9 people in our finance department, 6 in the legal department, and then we Beecham's would like have probably a half a floor solicitors dealing with conveyancing on our work all the time. And an important part in order to manage the risk is really a focus on the governance and compliance side. So we're fortunate enough to have 3 people in that department, a head of compliance and quality assurance, a national compliance manager, and also someone specialising only on data protection, which is a massive issue for all of us. So it's these resources that go into and support the ability to manage this at this scale. And the Response approach might be slightly different to some others in that we don't employ people to kind of sell Respond or to acquire projects, you know. What we do is we employ people to project manage our construction. So that's what our work is all about. And in order to do that, they need to have the qualifications and skills to do that well. So this slide here is talking about the type of delivery. And one of the things that sometimes is difficult for us as we talk to each other about housing delivery is that we use different terms, and we use the same terms with different meanings at times. Now, not just all of us who are sort of on the inside of this sector and know what we're saying, but for all of those on the outside who are trying to, whether it's in the political world, whether it's in local councillors, and so on. So I've said for a number of times it would be helpful for us to agree a common language. So when we come to talk about things like pipeline, you know, acquisitions, what it means for something to be acquired or to be built or bought or delivered or allocated or closed or whatever, what do we mean by those? And by not being clear about that, sometimes it can be misunderstood, and we might be misunderstood as being possibly obfuscating or you know, spinning a yarn in some way. And of course, that's not what's happening at all. People are very clear about so everything's backed up with kind of massive Excel spreadsheets, and you have all your information. It's as clear as day. So the whole subject of turnkey and acquisitions is something that I'd like to talk about because it is something that is seen as a problem. And in order to understand, for me to understand why it might be seen as a problem, we need to understand is what do people mean by turnkey? Now, in the world, in Respond world, what turnkey means is that you pay a small deposit. And by the way, we don't pay 10%, you pay less, but pay a small deposit and pay at the end of the construction. But it's construction that we have commissioned. You know, it wouldn't be built if we didn't commission it. So that's what we mean by turnkey. But most of our work is actually not turnkey. We do it under a development agreement, and I'm going to talk about that now in a few moments, just to explain what the approach to that and what the benefits of that might be. So there is a legitimate concern when people have this concern about turnkey or acquisitions, and it's about displacing first-time buyers. And we should be concerned about that because we want the opportunity I have 2 sons, I'd love to see if they could afford to buy homes. There's not much sign of it at the moment, but you know, it would be great if they could. It'd be great given that one of them is paying a hell of a lot more rent than they would ever have to pay in a mortgage. It would be great to see if that was possible. Or alternatively, if there was an affordable rental scheme available, and now the government is working on it, that is another way to have a lifetime home at a much lower rent than the market rent currently being paid. So we've been told clearly that it's not okay to kind of buy up stock or just to grab it out of the market when actually people who want and need and are waiting for that. So guess what? We don't actually do that. So if you could go to the next slide, or just give you some statistics, and I go into more detail. So this is just about the scale. So Respond is a national organisation. We are active in the 26 counties, and we've so far built 6,390 homes, and that includes, believe it or not, actually the original affordable homes which were built for local authorities. And we've commenced 1,877 schemes since May of 2018. On the right, you'll see the current number under construction is 1288, and there's the amount of money that the state invested for that to all happen. So moving on to there's a couple of images just to show you there. There's some Part 5 homes in Somerton Lucan, 32. And again, you know, we're moving now into NZEB and A-rated, and the homes are just fantastic. So to see that people will have, you know, much less cost in terms of heating their homes and managing homes is really good. So one of the issues, I guess, for Respond has been that we can't only be thinking about the new homes and the people that we're here to support in the future, which we're keen to do. We have to think of people who've had Respond homes since 1982 and be aware of the BEAR ratings that would apply. So for that reason, in the last 4 years, we've invested 20 million, over 20 million, in deep retrofit upgrades of homes so that we can address fuel poverty for people who have those older homes with a higher cost. And we have some more to complete. So we think that's just as important. So if we move on, there's another image there of another scheme, just a bit of contrast. This is Clonascilla, Allendale, 28 homes, again, apartments. And there is something for us to all think about, and that's about apartment living. Because increasingly, whether it's through PRS or private sales, the more and more people in the urban areas are living in apartments. So we need to think about the management issue. So this is a very large issue in Respond's mind and on the mind of the board of Respond. How do we build communities, effective communities? How do we manage our housing stock? How do we work with our tenants so that if I'm a tenant in a block and my behavior becomes a problem for others, how is that managed? And how can I be supported? Because if it's the case that there's good reason why I'm behaving that way, if it's a case that I have complex needs, that I have my own, you know, childhood trauma or whatever, we want to be able to support that. So for Respond, that wouldn't frighten us because we've, you know, 77 staff who are supporting people who are homeless, who are, you know, qualified social workers or social care workers, and we have nearly the same number of people in running our early child care and education services. So there's a few more slides. I don't know if you want to put those up there, Craig. Thank you. So here's the question then I was asked to address is, how then does our activity fit with this concern about acquisitions and with the whole business of turnkey? So for us, it's a very simple principle that we have in Respond, and that is our job is to add to the national housing stock, not to shuffle it around, not to acquire something that's already there, but to add to the national housing stock. And we do this by commissioning, and Sean said the same earlier, commissioning the construction of additional homes, not the acquisition of ones that were going to be built anyway or that were for sale or could be available to others, first-time buyers or whoever, but additional homes that wouldn't otherwise be built. So that's the principle, and that's how we do it. So if we move on a little bit there. So how then do we, so the purpose of this conversation was to say, how can AHBs help with delivery? There's an urgent need, there's a homeless crisis, there's an urgent need for more homes. So what can we all do? And I guess what we learned, and it can be applied by other AHBs, small and large, is that instead of doing smaller developments, do larger ones. So as much as possible. So I mentioned last year, our average size was 55. So delivering, whether we're delivering 50 or 100 homes in the same time scale as 10 homes, obviously the use of your overhead, all your costs and infrastructure is much more efficient if we're producing more homes in the same developments, because you could have the same number of developments and a much greater number of homes delivered at the end. I know that sounds incredibly simplistic, but it has been a practical issue of how we've ramped up from not so huge level of delivery to a significant level at the moment. So more and bigger projects but overseen by our own in-house team. Now, it does require, and Eddie mentioned it earlier, like you do actually need, so we'd have like very detailed and significant protocol files for every single project, with lots of people who have to sign off and go through the whole process of all of that. And it is needed to have that and to have all the financial models done. And I do want to talk a little bit further about the risk. So AIB mentioned about the construction risk. I'd like to talk about that in a moment, but maybe we'll go on to the next slide first. So this is an example. Sean showed this from a different angle. This is their partnership with TUA for the 155 homes up in Enniskerry, 50 of which were the first cost rental project in Ireland. And all of the AHBs are keen to deliver affordable rental, and we believe that that's now possible. I think we've satisfied ourselves there is a model that can be done. It's really a question now of government policy, and I know the Minister is supporting that, and hopefully he'll get support within this budget to allow us to go on and do this at scale, because it means that in terms of having mixed tenure on a particular site, you can have private, you can have social, and you can have affordable for sale and affordable rental on the same site. So that would be what we'd all like to see happen. So if we move on then. Okay, so there's a typo on this. This should say 59 homes rather than 29. And this is a rendering of the final image. It's not yet completed. It is at the roof level. And this is the site that the Taoiseach and Minister for Housing visited on Monday morning. But it's quite nice. And so when we look at the different things we're doing around the country, we're very conscious that this is to be people's homes and communities. So how can we make it a place you would want to live and they would want to live and look after, and children will find pleasant for them to live in? So then I think there's only one or two slides left, and then I'll just summarize a bit the risk thing. So this is just an example. It's actually next door to the apartments, the two apartment blocks we built next door to it, opposite IKEA that I showed you earlier. And this one is Fingal. It's a Fingal property, and we run a homeless service there. But for us, the key thing is that this one is an own-door apartments. So people have fabulous apartments. So while they're in there for those 7 months, they have the dignity of their own autonomy, their own agency in their own lives, with their own families in really high quality accommodation. But also they've got the 24-hour wraparound services and supports to bring them through and out into their own properties. So there's one more slide, I think. So this is the key thing I really wanted to talk to you about, which was, so what are we doing by way of innovation in trying to control housing costs, the cost of the homes that we're acquiring, and to ensure delivery, and I guess to just have a good outcome for everybody. So a few years back, we designed our own legal agreement. It wasn't cheap. But we wrote our own development agreement. And in that development agreement, it's very much focused on for the benefit of the AHB. It sets out what we require in terms of collaterals and all the rest of it from the developing company and the construction firm, and it has to be delivered at a fixed price. Now, why would people accept our kind of domineering approach to this? The reason they do it is because there's give and take. So there is the take, but the give is that we will finance the development construction phase. We do finance it. So using the advance CAF, we'll pay for the site and we'll pay the stage payments as we go through the project. And what that allows is that the construction firm, they may already be building turnkey project for us, but they might have used up all their finance on that turnkey project. And this would allow them to commence another project for us, and we'll finance it through that process. And they can then deliver twice as many homes for us. Now, in that agreement, that's very attractive for them because they've certainty about payment. It allows them to progress. They don't have to access the finance. But from our viewpoint, there is no cost of the development finance. Now, I know banks want to lend the money and we need them. out there doing it, and that's valued and appreciated and all the rest of it. But we reckon we're saving per home 20 to 28,000 per home delivered by us financing it, rather than the developer having to seek that finance externally. And we think that's important because we think the cost is important. So anyway, there are many different models to do it, but this is the model, one of the models we're using, and we're using it extensively. So finally then, just to say, it's not just about delivering homes, it's about delivering communities as well. And there's a list of the activities that we're involved in, with 16 early education and childcare centres, 6 homeless services, daycare centres for older people, refugee resettlement programmes for local authorities. And just to say, in all of our work, and we're developing at the moment in 16 local authority areas, we couldn't do it without their support or approval. It's their development plan, they are the planning authority, they do the allocations, and we do it in partnership with them, and we're there when we're invited to do it with them. So I guess that just about wraps up my input, I think, today.
Thanks very much, Declan. That was extremely useful. Very good overview of your approach and your model. I think it gave us, I suppose, an idea of the undertaking that's involved in being on site with over 1,200 homes. The level of capacity building that you've done within Respond at a sort of senior management team and across all professions, I suppose, within the organisation, to actually be able to facilitate a development programme like the one you've just described. And we see the quality there in the build, and not just the quality of the design, but the finish, where you see communities actually being put together. So thanks for that input, Declan, and we'll come back with questions at the end. Orla, if I can ask you to give your presentation or thoughts now. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, Eddie and Declan as well. I suppose I approached this more as a response to the presentation, rather than as a presentation of where I'm coming from. So maybe what I will hope to do is to provoke the question and answer session a little bit, or to get people thinking about it. Firstly, on a very positive note, I think the efforts to change how data is gathered is really important. It might sound boring to a lot of people, but if you can measure it, you can manage it, and getting a handle on data and real-time information is a way of seeing what's working really well and doing more of it, and seeing what isn't working and fixing it. And I also would agree with Declan on just streamlining the words that are being used around a lot of this, because I think there's a lot of confusion in people's mind, and also then maybe there's some double counting as well, or misunderstandings about delivery. So I think sorting out the terminology and the data is great, and I would very strongly welcome that. To talk about procurement without boring people about procurement, I think there's two sides to it. Procurement is really just how you buy things, and I gave the analogy recently. It's like buying a pair of shoes. We don't go and buy the cheapest pair of shoes. We think about what's going to last the winter and what we can wear on a wet day. And none of us make decisions really on cheapest. We tend to make value judgments about particularly big ticket items and how we spend money. And there's no bigger ticket item than housing. The investment needs to be good for 100 years. And every penny spent now, needs to be resilient. It needs to be climate proofed, and it needs to be family proofed for all the people who will live there over the next time. We're only building 1% of our stock a year, so it's going to have to last 100 years. So I think we need to be very careful about value judgments about housing, and not be cost is really important, value for money is really important, but it shouldn't be the driver and of everything. And that goes back to, I think, some of the really nice images we saw from Declan, and how he spoke about creating places for people, creating long-term communities, and we can see that in Dublin. We can look at somewhere like Marino, that is a beautiful place to live 100 years after it was built, because it was carefully done, and it was done with good materials, and people thought about how people would live there, and people who live there love their homes. And it's incredibly successful. And the vast majority of social housing built in this country over the last 100 years has been enormously successful. And all the research shows that. And you can see the communities that are really strong are the ones that are really connected to their place. They have services, they love their homes, and they're well built. And we need to maybe carry some of those lessons on, because the kind of short-term urgency about housing has often led in the past to really serious procurement mistakes about how housing was done, and things were done in a hurry or rushed or built in a shoddy way, or built without services, and that just stores up a problem for the next 10 or 20 years, and it doesn't really solve the housing problem for the time we need it. So what I mean about procurement is there's two sides to it. There's one about deciding what you want and defining that, and the other side of it is then knowing the market. You have to understand that capacity building is really important in the market now. We have issues with skills, we have issues with quality, and we need to get some competition into the market. Some of the reason people are paying a lot for housing is because there's very little competition. So we need to regrow our small builder sector in order to deliver and to have sustainable jobs. And that means opening up the market. And ironically, it means not bundling things into very big contracts. It means breaking them up, which might seem counterintuitive. But if you bundle things into very big contracts, you have very few people who can compete. They can drive prices very high because there are very few who can compete. And at the end of the day, you have the same builders building it and more middlemen. Building is very small scale in this country, and the more you deal with the small guys, the more direct input you have to control quality, the more you can weed out the bad apples, because you know who they are and you cannot do repeat work. But also by having small lots, you can quality control, because when people have maybe 20 houses to build this year and they think there's a pipeline for next year, you will get much better quality and much better prices. If somebody gets a 5-year contract for 2,000 houses, you have no control, and you lose that control in all of that. So I would welcome a few other things that came from Eddie. I think more SHIP is good. I mean, that basically means doing things efficiently and getting good value for money and controlling it. I would very much welcome the reduction in turnkeys, and I get the distinction from response side about what turnkey is. But I think if you maybe unpick that a little bit, what Declan is saying is that if we do it through a procurement route that isn't buying a house that's finished, the procurement route is too onerous and too cumbersome. So maybe the real problem there is we need to fix some of the procurement rules that are local and easily fixed. The European rules are not the problem really, it's local approvals and procurement policy that is the problem, and that's all fixable to my mind. The EU rules are fairly light touch, and they're to do with fairness and defining what you want and not having corruption in the system. So they're not looking for a lot. In relation to design build, I'm afraid I'm going to have to come out very strongly against design build, and I'll explain why. I think it would be great to have design frameworks, and it would be great to have build frameworks. I think that's a really good way of streamlining it. But if you listen to Declan's experience, you will hear that when you need a lot of expertise for this, and when you have that expertise, you need the expertise in your corner. When you go a design build route, you're effectively employing all of these architects, engineers, quantity surveyors and planners, but you have no access to them. They work for the builder. Builders like design and build for a reason. It's because they can control quality. They don't have anybody who has the client's ear, who is telling them about corner cutting or difficulties on site. So I think rather than seeing the design team as a sort of drawing contractors, they are professional advisors, so you have, architects trained for 10 years. They know about project management. They know all the stuff that goes on sites. They know they know risks, they know the regulatory system, they know the insurance structures, they know how contracts work, and they're on your side. So they're effectively, in the client's corner, being your eyes and ears, warning about things that might come up and managing risk very carefully, and have all the levers then of quality control control by not paying people if the work isn't done properly, and dealing with claims and anything else that crops up. So I would very strongly talk towards a more traditional procurement, and certainly for anybody who'd like a bit more to understand how risk can play out in design build. BBC have some excellent podcasts on what's been going on with the Grenfell inquiry recently, and how badly wrong design build can go in terms of very inexperienced people who are managing very large contracts and client not knowing about it. And worse, the design team, who may be very experienced people, having no authority to pick up the phone to the client and to warn them or to let them know what's happening. So to my mind, you're in design build, you're missing out all of the expertise that your design team can bring. And I don't agree, when I teach procurement, I don't agree that it's faster, because if you want to do design build with strong quality controls, you have to document everything to the nth degree before you go on site. So whereas contractors will always say it's quicker, and we'll go on site with half a drawing. Effectively on the client side, if you want to make sure that they don't make it up as they go along, you need to give them very, very detailed, very tightly specified drawings in the first place. So if you want to do it properly, it isn't actually any quicker, and I think you lose the levers of control of quality and on price. So I'd be happy to talk about that again. And then I suppose the other thing is that it can be a lever for change. We have a lot of builders going to be unemployed now. The state shouldn't be paying them to sit at home. It should be paying them to get out there as SMEs and to help with the housing crisis. And how the state sets this up can enable those people to get small contracts, to get on their feet. And then when they are capitalised, to do private developments on the back of that. So the state spending on this programme could be an enormous lever for lots of things, for training in good energy standards and ventilation. I can't do the session today without talking about COVID and ventilation. We have a big problem with ventilation in our buildings coming down the tracks. This is the next pyrite to my mind, and you need those quality controls to know what's going on in there. But it's also that a delivery programme where you use traditional procurement can be a route to drag up standards across the sector and to recapitalise the SMEs for private development, and to employ apprentices and lots of other things that could be really useful. Including, which is my last point, including urban regeneration. We not only have a huge looming crisis of unemployment in construction, it is going to be very regionally based. And the last thing we want over the next year is people driving to Dublin Monday to Friday to work on sites. We need people to be employed in the regions in a lot of cases, and to be employed close to home. So I think we have a unique opportunity here that has landed out of nowhere, which is that we have builders all around the country. We have vacancy all around the country. We have housing need all around the country. We have EU funding for energy retrofits available. And all of the talk last year about the skills shortage, which was a barrier to a lot of housing, has loosened up and has been overcome. So that takes me to my last point, which is to do with the housing need. I think we're all aware that on the social housing lists, probably because families have been prioritised, but on the list there's a real need for small households, 1, 2 and 3 person households, to be housed sustainably and integrated into communities. A poor response to that need would be to build blocks of 1-bedroom apartments and to say that this is a community. People who are in small, well, every community needs a mix of sizes, but people particularly in small households, I think, don't need to be isolated or stigmatised. They need to be integrated. And we have a Towns First policy now in the programme for government. And as I said, we have loads of vacancy all around the country, lots of towns with over the shop and former commercial buildings that are empty, which I think are an enormous opportunity because they can be turned around very quickly. For 40, 50, 60,000, we could be turning around some, for the cost of an apartment for a single person or a couple. You could be turning around these buildings. You're not waiting for infrastructure. They have a home that's part of a community where they have shops and brings footfall into the towns. Often they might have a bus route, and they are probably more easy to access in terms of services and medical services, and maybe carers and all of that. If they're more densely, you know, they have more people in a town, it's easier to get around than driving around. So I think there's an enormous benefit there, and there is a regulatory proposal that I was involved with to do that quickly, and the Minister could do it very quickly because it only requires regulations, which would be a way of supporting owners of some of these buildings to get into repair and lease schemes, or to sell the building to the local authority, maybe where you could put 3 apartments into a building or something like that. And it would be very quick, very sustainable, and I think would give a better outcome for a lot of the people who are in need of small households, than maybe waiting for new build or having new build in more isolated locations. So I would very much welcome what Eddie said about an integrated approach, maybe, and that the money available for housing can lever so many other benefits. If the procurement strategy is got right, it can lever regional jobs that are decent jobs. It can lever apprenticeships. It can lever training in good energy and ventilation standards in our housing stock. It can lever footfall into towns that are struggling and need people. It can even give a bit of support to small business owners in shops and restaurants in regional towns where maybe they've been closed for 6 months and the upper floors could be on a long-term lease to a local authority with refurbishment grants and supports, which would be a support to the SME sectors in our towns and suburbs as well. When I say regional, I think the cities obviously are very important too. We have a lot of vacancy in Dublin. Particularly in certain sectors, certain parts of the city, there's a lot of vacancy, and backlands and brownfield and all of those locations where we can maximise. I think, you know, to some extent we have been, the playing out of this crisis, I suppose, has been framed as a market, a housing market. And that has been framed by the development sector in a very particular way. And I think we need to interrogate some of the things that have been said to us about that, or that we've just accepted. You know, we shouldn't accept that every new home is a new build. We have 180,000 vacant homes and we have nearly 30,000 vacant commercial premises. We shouldn't accept that some of their strategy, which is that we only need small units. We need small units for the housing list, and we need small units specifically in some locations like the older suburbs. But we really need is long-term housing that is flexible and can build communities, and that's family housing. So I don't think we should be misled into thinking the solution to housing is property and new build and all small units. That is market driven rather than housing need driven. And I would, I suppose, speak very strongly for the construction and the design sector. There are people there, you know, there are no amount of people there who are very highly trained in how to do this. You need to tap into them and get them onto a framework on your team. I don't think, you know, if you're talking about a manual for people in local authorities and people in the sector, that is really welcome. But a manual will not replace the 10, 20, 30 years experience that an architect or an experienced design team will bring to you, in terms of their knowledge of the industry and how to get the best price and how to manage it and not be ripped off on claims and poor standards and quality. So I would strongly argue for that. That expertise is there, and you can tap into it. It would be an enormous support to people in local authorities, I suppose, who are being put under pressure now to deliver numbers. Often when, and I see it from the other side, when I see some of this work being reported by students or graduate students, they often, people are put at the procurement end who don't have the experience or the support structure. And these people are really, really key now. You know, they need experienced people to help them, and they need a support structure behind them, I suppose, that'll back them up in the pressure they're going to find themselves under on some of this. So I suppose I'd make a strong pitch for that, for procurement to be really, really considered very carefully and de-risked. But a lot of the other presentation there, I think is very valuable and really welcome. Data gathering, centralising, having information in real time, putting in supports for people who are going to deliver, having an objective about affordable housing, about affordable cost rental, and about, you know, using best practice systems in order to deliver that, I think are all really excellent, and hopefully will play out over the next year.
Thanks very much, Orla, for that. Really appreciate your comments there. I think you've given us both a sort of an honest assessment and critique maybe of where we're at, you know, in terms of what should the priorities be in terms of trying to reach the delivery targets that we've set ourselves or even exceed them, and bringing in some of that learning from your own experience, but as you say, from abroad as well, you know, in terms of maybe just look before you leap, you know, what we might be walking into. And I think that sort of brings me to my first question, or the first question that I think I should pose to Eddie and Declan. Orla, I suppose, made a strong assessment or critique there of the design build frameworks. Now, I know, Declan, you have your own in-house expertise, so you might have your own views on this. But Eddie, as you mentioned it earlier, maybe we just get your thoughts on Orla's assessment there.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I agree with Orla to a certain extent. Design build is not a panacea, and it has to be very carefully chosen. So what we're proposing with design and build is that it only be used on straightforward sites, and it only be used for straightforward forms of construction. You know, so you're talking about your I suppose conventional two-story scheme outside of Dublin, where you're not building 3 and 4 stories. So straightforward, conventional, non-complex construction. And we think there is definitely a gap there. I've looked at some of the programs for delivery of some schemes like that, and it's unacceptable that it's taking you know, a year for a set of tender documents to be prepared by a design team. You know, once a planning permission has been granted, it's taken far too long in some instances to get that, and then we go through another procurement process to get a contractor. So from the time you have your design, your preliminary design fixed, it can take up to 2 years to start on site, and we have to be better than that. Now, it is important to note as well, when the design build contractor comes in, they don't get free rein. They are supervised. They are supervised to the same level as a traditional contractor would be. We have clerk of works. We have design experts employed as employers' representatives to keep an eye on the design and keep an eye on the design process, so it can work. And the other thing about it is, I think, first of all, the Grenfell Tower, that's not applicable to the Irish situation. That's not what we're talking about here. And I don't quite see the connection there. That was a building control failure. We are talking about straightforward 2-story, sometimes 3-story construction that the construction sector is well capable of doing, and well capable of doing well. The other thing is that local authorities are already starting to use this, and those that use it are seeing huge advantages in it. They're seeing huge advantages in terms of cost, in terms of time, and there are, to my mind, there's been very little, if any, quality control issues. And the other point to make out is a huge part of our delivery is acquisition, be it right or wrong, it's acquisition, or it has been up to now, and has been turnkey. And we have no supervision on those. So, you know, it is horses for courses, but I agree with Orla, there are downsides to design and build. We have to carefully choose what projects we apply it in, and we have to control it, and we have to make sure that people understand what's expected of it. So that's where we're coming from on design build.
Declan, did you want to come in there? Have you any views on this question?
So I think it's a matter of so I agree with both sides really. We have a particular approach that we take about having our own internal people, but when we have a particularly large scheme, we'll actually engage an external architectural firm or project management firm to oversee the project, because even with 20 people, there's a limit to what you can do. So I'd be a big fan, and respond way before my time, a big fan of having the expertise internally. I mean, we've recently had presentations to our own audit committee. We're trying to understand the risks that we're taking. And for them, so you'd have people there. You have 2 people from, one a main board director, Bank of Ireland, another former one from AIB, and lots of other skill sets there. our own formerly chair of board, Orla, and they're looking at what we're doing and they're asking us, how we're managing risk. And so I get huge, and they get huge comfort from having professionals speak to them, both from the legal side, but also from the design side. And to see, so we'd have checklists for everything, and they're astounded, and they see, how that's done. And so I would tend to agree that this is a very specialist area. I wouldn't let me near a project, personally, in a million years. It is a very special skill set. I mean, there's just one thing I wanted to mention. I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, just about the risk of the development risk, the financial risk of AHBs financing projects. Do you want me to do that later? Or
go ahead now, Declan.
Yeah. So essentially, I mean, there is a reasonable point that was made by AB earlier, and they said, look, why not contract this out? Let the bank do the financing. Now, you can, and of course, for every time we contract out of something, we pay someone to carry that risk. We contract out of a risk, and someone else contracts into it for a fee. So you do have to ask yourself whether you've got the capacity to contract into the risk yourself, and you have the skill sets. So the principal issue that for us in all of this is, what if some or all of the construction firms we're dealing with at the moment went bust in the morning? What would happen? Now, as my colleagues here will know, there are bonds in place, there's collateral warranties in place and all the rest of it. However, the bond, it won't necessarily cover the full cost to bring in another construction firm. So what we do is we do an exercise to look at 10% additional cost or 15% additional cost to get in another contractor to take up the work. We price that up and we see what the cost to us would be. Now, the cost to us depends the point in the life cycle of the project this happens. So the first quartile of the construction phase is where the biggest exposure is. Almost all of it is in that cycle. In fact, if you go into the third and fourth, we're in a positive situation rather than a negative one. So what we're doing is we're managing the projects, we're quantifying that number for every single project. We're aware of how many we have in that first quartile, and adding it all up and ensuring that's within our cash reserves. We have the ability to do it if needed. And obviously our audit committee are all over this. So there is a risk to be managed. You do have to have the resources, you have to have the risk mitigation strategies, you have to have the documentation, but it is possible to do it. And if you're going to save 20 to 28,000 per home, and that has got to be financed over 30 years, that's a lot of money that the state doesn't have to pay. It's no benefit to Respond as an organisation, but it's not about us. It's about us using the money well. So I think that's important, but that goes back to the point I think Orla was saying again, and I think in fairness Eddie is saying, about having the skill sets, to make these evaluations, to accurately record it and manage the risks involved.
Thanks, Declan. Yep, sorry, Orla, you wanted to come back in?
Yeah, just to comment on that. I would totally agree with Declan. It's really technical. Risk management of projects is technical. You're aligning contracts and markets and economic cycles and expertise and the unknowns that go wrong on every project. It is very technical, and to see it as an easy, like buying a washing machine or buying a car, I think is a big mistake. You're actually building an aeroplane while you're flying it over the course of 2 years in most cases. And, some of the time it might look like the pilot is on autopilot and it's doing it itself. But as soon as something goes wrong, the pilot is back in the cockpit and the autopilot is turned off, and you need an experienced pilot. I think expertise is really important in that. Just on the financial side, on bonds, since the crash, bonds just aren't available at the scale they were before. So 25% of the contract value bond is probably only available at 12.5% or something now. So that means there's a risk there to be managed, and that's, I suppose, back to contractor selection as well, and whether you go on lowest price or whether you have other safeguards in that. And I'd also agree on the private finance. I've been looking a lot at Part 5 costs recently, and that's 18 or 20 grand of that being this is in a sort of 3-bedroom house type. 18 or 20 grand being private finance cost is not unusual. That's an enormous cost to the state that's completely unnecessary when money can be borrowed free at the moment. So I think, you know, the state financing, when people are asking the state to take money for free, paying private finance is a poor use of money and resources. And also, just I suppose to go back to Grenfell, yes, there is an element of Grenfell that is regulatory failure. We have an even weaker regulatory system here, which means that your procurement system has to accommodate that risk, and you have to build it in. To my mind, and I've done a lot of work on this, Grenfell is primarily a procurement failure. And you can track that really clearly from the client side right down through the expertise, the outsourcing, the hiding of risk, the very, very poor risk management, outsourcing to lowest cost, outsourcing to people who didn't know what they were doing. So when I talk about procurement being technical, what I mean is that it's effectively saying over the next 3 years, what could possibly go wrong, and how do we mitigate that? What do we put in place? Who's responsible? What's the fallback if it goes wrong? Where does the money come from if it goes wrong? How do we deal with this? What I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that if you hand all of that to a contractor who may or may not be aware of it, but has certainly got conflicts of interest in all of that, you often don't know there's a problem until it's too late, or they are dealing with things in a way that suits their commercial interests rather than your long-term objectives. So the tension is between them short-term wanting to get paid and get off site, and you thinking 40, 50, 60 years into the future, and who's making the key decisions? Is it the person who wants to get paid on Friday and leave site, or is it the person who will be managing this building for the next 50 years? And so many key decisions have to be made through that prism. And I think they should be made on the client side with expertise, and not on the contractor side. You know, that's the kind of the point I'm trying to make. But I totally agree with Declan. It is horses for courses, and every project has to be considered carefully in how you set things up. And if the problem at the moment is long delays on hiring design teams and long delays on getting contractors, that's all fixable. You know, a framework agreement, a national framework agreement through the OGP could tick all the boxes and have you design teams in a couple of months, and a national framework for SME builders could do the same. And then it's just a case of people calling them in off the framework. If we wanted to fix this, we could fix it very quickly.
Yeah, and I think the OGP have actually had design team frameworks in place for a number of years, and I know AHBs have successfully used them, and as have local authorities. So certainly,
yeah, there's a lot of duplication and administrative cost in all of this. You know, we're a small country. We know what needs to be done. You know, and we vet people, and there's nothing to say we can't have a framework whereby if your engineer or your architect or your QS or your builder isn't performing on the first contract they get, well, then they don't get on the framework the year after. And that's an incredibly strong lever for quality. You know, that's a really strong lever to get quality and to get good prices.
Okay, I'm going to move on to a slightly different topic. It's a question that's been raised. There's two parts to this. The first part is in relation to one-bed units. So I think every speaker has mentioned the need to have one-bed units, but Martina Smith from Hale has asked the question, how can we incentivize developers to actually deliver them? So how do we make it more attractive? And the second part is linked to it, is from Greg Campbell, from Campbell to Kell. And again, he's saying each of the speakers have referenced the need for one-bed units, but given that we've just come through a pandemic where people are at home all the time and also working from home, how do you factor in maybe the need for more internal space, not just one-bed units with maybe external space, actually maybe home offices? So there's two parts to that, if whoever wants to kick off in answering that.
Well, I might just comment. I mean, if we want developers to build apartments, I think we need to stop the deregulation of competing things like co-living. Co-living is twice as lucrative as apartments, and because it was deregulated. If we want to have co-living, it should be regulated like a hotel or a medium long stay hotel, and that would change the finances to make apartment development more attractive. So the way that co-living was deregulated has damaged the development sector for building apartments. I think I totally agree on the working from home, and it's more than that. It's children, it's the needs of disability, it's carers, it's full lifetime housing. I think the standards that were shrunk are too small, and I think they're optimum for most people, and making space doesn't mean making cost. The high value items in an apartment are the same. It's the same: windows, doors, kitchen and bathroom, and like electrics. They're the high value items. Floor space is cheap, and floor space gives enormous flexibility for another child, for a carer, for somebody to be adapted for disability, for all sorts of other flexibility in terms of long-term 100-year housing. You need that. So building to minimum standards, I think, is a mistake, and the standards being reduced was a mistake. And taking out cross ventilation, having too many people sharing a lift, taking balconies out of build to rent, I think we're incredibly retrograde. And now that we see the consequences in pandemic of not being able to ventilate properly, 200, one scheme I looked at, there's 600 people sharing lift. That's permitted under build to rent. People don't have balconies, so they can't get outside, they can't ventilate the rooms, and that's not even just virus ventilation. That's if you paint or if you burn the toast, you can't ventilate your room if you haven't got a door to a balcony. So I think we need to be reversing particularly the build to rent standards, and we need to be re-regulating co-living, and we need to pandemic proof our future housing. So not just energy now, we need to be really seriously thinking about public health, because all of these features were in our housing. If you look back at the balcony access apartments, in Dublin particularly, they had dual aspect and fresh air. The long corridor down the middle build to rents are not healthy, and they're not very pleasant places to live because there's a lot of noise.
Declan, did you want to come in there?
Yeah, so Parag Joklikar is our head of development and architect, and he would regularly say, listen, the actual additional cost, which I think is what Orla is saying, to add one more bedroom, like everything else is there, is really not that significant. So if you think about, so why have we got, and how is it that we've got such a need for one beds? Well, there are people who are homeless and so on, obviously, but then there's a hell of a lot of homeless families also. But I suppose it's about family formation and family breakup. So if I find myself, not living with my partner and I have children, it would be nice to have them come and stay. And it would be really good for them, I hope, for them to come and stay. So, and also as I get older, like as Orla says, I might need a carer. And if it was a housing first thing, it might be useful. If someone could be there with me sometimes, I might need that kind of support, intensive support at some stage. So I think, I suppose so we have, how we evaluate our projects, by the way, is we do this once a month, this month, twice this month. All the projects come in. So the 6 development teams, and they have to present it to an executive development team, head of legal, head of finance, head of housing, and myself, and head of property, obviously. And we go through the projects to evaluate them, to see, which will you do and which won't you do. And when we make that recommendation, 2 weeks later, it goes to the board subcommittee, which is an external architect on it, by the way. And then it goes to the board. Now, in looking at those, we always have a kind of a wily eye to what the proposer is coming at. And when we see studios or we see one-bed apartments, we're asking, hang on a minute. You can't look at this as the average cost per unit because you're not getting all 2s and 3 beds. So it might be very attractive, for construction firms or developers to be adding in 1s. To make the thing look attractive. So I think there's just more than one thing to think about this. But at the moment, we are producing quite a number within the mix of 1 beds because there's such a demand for that at the moment. But I think we do need to think of that further. Finally, just on lift cores, I'm totally with Orla, totally. So the big issue I mentioned before about housing management, this is my single biggest concern. I was on the board of Ballymun Generation for 10 years, right, as a non-executive director. How do we make sure we don't go back to the failings in terms of all of the support and all the rest of it? But one of the things for me is there was a proposal, an expression of interest, we wouldn't touch it because it was 300 units with a very small number of lift cores. Now you can produce if this is cost rental, the cost can be lower because you have less cores. But what's that going to be like? If you've got 15, 20, 30 families off the same corridor and I'm the difficult person making all the noise, everybody suffers. We know this from homeless services. We'd have no more than 5 apartments on any one level, usually 3 on a particular level on a core, in order to improve the quality of life. So there's cost implications, and we understand that. So I think there's many ways to look at it, and none is 100%.
Well, just to take the other side on those cost implications of more lifts, taking out the lifts actually made development more expensive because you can't build in phases.
Right.
Under the previous standards, a bit like building Marion Square, you could build in chunks and you got a front door and you got those apartments available immediately. And in terms of construction sequence, it made an awful lot of sense, and you were financing small pieces and you were getting them in use quickly. On these very large schemes with a small number of lifts, you might have saved 50 grand on the lift, but you'll pay 100 grand on carrying the finance because you can't use any of that building until the entire building is finished. So the only way that the only driver of that was that in terms of planning, it added to site value. But in terms of building buildings, it actually added to cost by taking out the lifts.
So short-term thinking again. Yeah. We have a question in actually, Orla, it might be directly for you. In relation to, you mentioned over the shop accommodation and making use of that and the whole vacant site strategy. So Alan Dodsley has actually made an application, but he's saying it was for 2 apartments and one did get approval, but the other one ended up being marginally smaller than what the regulations would allow for, because obviously you're fitting into an over the shop situation. So even though it could have been a 1-bed unit with separate bathroom and separate bedroom, it was refused. So I suppose, what's your view? He feels this is an intransigence or a lack of flexibility.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like, rules come from somewhere, and they're often, the reason they started might have changed over time, you know, and things get built upon. The regulatory proposal was, and it was, the idea was that some local authorities would run a pilot, that if you had a building like this that you either wanted to sell to the local authority or that you wanted to do a leasing scheme, that you as an owner could go to the local authority to a one-stop shop. You could go with drawings for what you wanted to do, instead of at the moment where you've got to go through a planning process, a fire cert process, a disability access cert process, possibly conservation, all separate, all people not speaking to each other, all different approval systems. So you might get planning, but you might fail on a fire cert. Huge cost to the owners and maybe get set back. That you would have a one-stop shop within a short space of time. You would pay a fee and you would see all the relevant people around a table. They would make a very pragmatic solution, pragmatic agreement by maybe saying, well, that's 100-year-old stairs, it'll be fine, but we want an escape window in the bedroom, or we will accept a smaller bedroom because, you know, it's a single bedroom, or we can fit it on this floor in the existing building, and that you could get an approval very quickly, and that at the end of that process, the local authority would come a bit like the NCT with a tick box list, check everything for safety, and not only would that sign off on that development, it could then be used in the HAP system instead of having another HAP inspection. That your sign off at completion, again, which you'd pay a fee for, would be a tick box, and you could then, that could then be something that fed into the RTB, that could feed into HAP inspections and everything else. So just, I suppose, rationalising the services in the local authority, removing the administrative hurdles for owners, and we have loads of this, and the over-the-shop schemes to date haven't succeeded because in most cases there were regulatory issues to do with compliance. We need to be much more pragmatic. As long as people are safe, if a staircase is there since 1850, it's fine. You know, but people do need to be safe in their homes, and the safety has to be really important. But trying to you know, refusing things because they don't meet modern standards really isn't acceptable. We can't demolish you know, most of the buildings in the country. We have to make them usable.
Great. Eddie, did you want to come in on that in relation to?
Yeah, just to reiterate, you know, we can't compromise on safety. At the end of the day, fire safety in particular and living standards And I know that's not the suggestion, but it is important. There is a rationale, there is a reason for standards. And we don't really have discretion on minimum standards. And I know that's not the suggestion, but I would be very cautious of, saying we should do this and do that. At the end of the day, a local authority official has to put their signature to this. And they have to say it's acceptable. And that's a very onerous undertaking for somebody to say that people can live in this and live safely. It's all very well to say that we should be absolutely driving this forward and promoting it until something goes wrong. And then
are you concerned about people being sued?
Sorry, and then it'll be who signed off on this, how did the local authority know it was there. We are seeing very good proposals for living over the shop. And to be quite frank about it, we're seeing some absolute rubbish coming in. That should never be let in the door and would be totally unacceptable to ask anybody to live in it. So, there are both sides to that. And I think when it comes to, I've worked as an official in local government for a long time. And the one person I always, you had to make sure was happy with something was the chief fire officer. And that's the end of it. And if they're not happy, nobody's happy, and it doesn't go any further. So pragmatism is all very well, but standards are there for a reason, and we have to adhere to them.
No, Eddie, I think, sorry, just to be clear, I teach fire safety as well. I am absolutely 100% committed to fire safety in this country, and I lobby for it all the time. Nothing I have said is about reducing standards. Everything I've said is about public health and safety. And the proposal was certainly not in any way to load liability on the local authority. That wasn't part of it, and it certainly wasn't to reduce standards for people in their homes either. Just to be clear where I'm coming from.
But maybe a little bit more flexibility in terms of what is coming in, like what applications are coming in and what can be, I suppose, happily signed off on by the local authority. We've committed to close the session at 3:30, so I just have one final question for each of the panelists, and it brings it back to the whole area of targets. I suppose the whole purpose of the session was to look at the housing delivery targets, where we're at, how much of an impact COVID has had so far. Some of that is uncertain at this point in relation to the end of the year and into 2021. But we do have a publication today of the Q1 and Q2 housing delivery statistics. So most of you, I think, probably haven't seen these yet, but for the social housing anyway, 1,467 units have been delivered in Q1 and Q2 out of a target of 11,167. So that's about 1,500 out of a target of over 11,000. So obviously there has been, there was an almost 2-month site closure for most sites, and then a knock-on delay just in general in getting back on site. And as Declan said, some sites were already starting to close pre-March. So, it's obviously well down though on where it would be. And I think there has been a lot of mitigating I suppose measures brought in to look at improving voids, the call for housing that was launched during the summer. But given that, that's where we're at in terms of output this year, how does each of the panelists feel in terms of the full year figures? Do we think we'll catch up? How much of it will go into next year? On the positive side, I will say there is over 29,000 homes in the delivery pipeline as of the end of Q2. So that's extremely positive. That's over 2,000 schemes where there are active sites in underway for social housing delivery. So it's not all bad news. It's just in relation to, I suppose, the delay and the impact of COVID. Where do the panelists see that sort of time frame, and should we just push out the times in general? Eddie, would you like to start, given you were?
Yeah, I suppose a couple of points to put it in context. First off, by nature of housing construction, and it's something actually we're trying to address, but it's going to take us a while to address it. By nature of the way schemes go, delivery is always weighted towards Q4. It's always kind of towards the end of the year to finish projects. At the moment, we estimate that about 1,200 units alone in new build will deliver in December. So that will, and obviously there's the delivery between now and December as well. We also have got approval for an additional 400 acquisitions over and above what was in the pipeline. So acquisitions are going to be over and will compensate for the lack of new build as a once-off because of COVID. The other thing to bear in mind is that voids alone, and I know they're not classed as new build, but at the end of the day, they do involve new people or tenants getting a new accommodation. They will deliver over 2,400 units this year, which is a lot more than other years. And that's thanks to the Minister securing €30 million stimulus funding. So between those two measures, the picture will certainly be a lot better at the end of the year. But I don't think on the new build front, we won't be at 100%, but we will be near enough to it. And given the disruption that COVID, not only due to the lockdown, but due to a slowdown on some sites because of the nature of the construction activity, we won't be as bad as the Q1 and Q2 figures or anything like it, like what they suggest.
Great. Declan, I go to you next.
Yeah, so, I mean, I can't remember exactly how the lockdown was, the length of time it was for construction, but let's imagine it was a quarter. So I think any reasonable person would say you're not going to get 4 quarters of delivery with 3 quarters of construction. You know, now we were lucky because we got essential site status for certain social housing projects. I think we had 11 of them go through. And we have said this, you know, at the delivery group with the minister about the importance of keeping construction going as essential in the future. And there seems to be an interest in that. That's hopefully we don't find ourselves at level 5, but we may very well. So that's the first point. The second thing, just about delivery, I guess what I learned. So in the 4 years I've been in Respond, you know, people talk to you about the 5,333 homes in the pipeline. Now that's in Respond, right? So you're sort of going, where are they? So what I learned was sobriety for me is how many homes are in construction. We bought the site. We're in contract. We are funded. It is happening. That's real. So this is our focus, constantly our focus of how many more are we putting into construction? And then there's some place for somebody to move into and live in and hopefully enjoy.
Great. Orla, that's the last word. Over to you now on this.
Yeah, actually the construction shutdown wasn't that long. It was 7 weeks. And a lot of the social
longer.
housing kept going, so it wasn't that bad. On the plus side, the nature of housing is it's naturally ventilated, so it's small rooms, so you don't tend to have, you know, what you might have in a hotel with the air conditioning not turned on and sealed windows and lots of people in the room trying to finish it. Other than at completion dates, you don't tend to get crowds on building sites because they can't work if they're on top of each other. So I think housing in terms of dealing with the pandemic is manageable to keep building at the same pace pretty much. The risks aren't on the building site, they're in people travelling in vans and sharing bedrooms rather than on the sites. So if we can manage the other stuff around the edges, I think the sites can be working at full productivity. Whether there's disruption from Brexit is a whole other question with materials, money, cost, disruption, labour, everything. That's another question we can't answer. Whether there's disruption with supply lines of materials due to COVID is another question as well. You know, even you know, not having as many planes flying, as many ships on the sea, materials come from all over the world now. You know, we bring in all our glass, we fly stuff in from China, we bring equipment from all over Europe. So again, lockdowns and another wave could impact on supply there. So again, that's kind of, these are sort of unknowns. I personally, I think the bigger risk maybe is, rather than the COVID disruption this year, is there's a huge over-reliance on the private sector for the social housing pipeline, and the uncertainty and now recession in the construction industry and dropping property prices will stall new build. If we're very reliant on, we talked about risk earlier, if we're very reliant on the private developers, The private developers are market-based, and if the market is rising and property prices are rising, they build, and if property prices are falling, they don't. So the over-reliance, I think, is a risk, and that has been exposed now. So it's all about money, and if it is going to go into acquisitions and price support on affordable housing, I think the state needs to be very, very careful about that, because these are very high cost solutions. Paying 350, 400,000 for acquisitions is very, very poor value for money. Paying 100,000 of a subsidy for an affordable housing scheme is very poor value for money. And the alternative ship and other routes really need to get resourced and supported so that we can be delivering housing for 250,000, and people can, the level of subsidy isn't as much, and then the money goes much further.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Orla. I think the Minister's comments, and I know, Declan, you're on the high level, and Eddie as well, the high level delivery group, which are keeping a very close eye on all of these delivery issues which are I suppose, arising. But I suppose it's reassuring to know that there's that level of eye and detail being kept on it. So I think we've reached the end of our discussion. There was definitely topics there for about 5 of the discussions from all of your insights and expertise. So really, I suppose it's just for me to say thank you to you, the panelists. We honestly couldn't do it without you. And there is a real, I suppose, generosity in sharing your expertise and your insights with all of the delegates who are tuning in. And so really just a thanks from the ICSH. We will be returning at about just after 10 o'clock tomorrow morning for our morning session. So until then, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Project Acorn, delivering homes across Ireland. Acorn Housing is the first private finance SPV created by an approved housing body. We have secured €50 million in private finance to purchase 250 vacant properties. These units will be refurbished and turned into urgently needed homes for social housing. This loan structure means the private finance is off balance sheet with limited recourse to Oakley Housing. As the bank debt does not contribute to Oakley's gearing, it enables Oakley to deliver more homes. This is a game changer for the social housing sector. This unique finance model can be scaled and replicated not just for Oakley, but for all approved housing bodies in Ireland. To date, through Acorn Housing, Oakley has created 128 homes for over 400 people. We have the potential to make this 250 homes for over 1,000 people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness.
I've been living here just over 2 years with my partner and my son James. My partner was living in a hostel in town when I met him, and we moved into homeless accommodation in Dunne. It wasn't a safe place for him. There was a lot of violent fights that we had to witness a lot, and it wasn't a place for a child. When Colin got the call, it was just amazing. We were celebrating. It's a home. That's my favourite part, It's given me the security to just think about my future, hopefully make James's life better, and that's my main focus of having a secure home.
Oakley Housing, delivering homes, creating communities, changing lives.